So yesterday I realized that last week's episode of Dave was the season finale, and that was kind of a bummer. So I started to talk to more people about the show just to see what they thought about it, and I started hearing more and more comparisons to the show Atlanta. And I personally believe that comparing the two shows is like comparing apples to oranges. I don't see them as very similar at all. But I'm going to take the time to sort of analyze and compare both shows this week, even though it's like comparing apples to oranges, because as Lil Dicky himself said, "Bitch, that phrase don't make no sense, why can't fruit be compared?" So let's do it.
You have now entered the spoiler zone.
Yeah, that was just as bad on your side as it was for me. So, Dave is FX's new show involving a comedic rapper and is drawing a lot of comparisons to Atlanta, which on a superficial level makes some sense, but on a thematic level, you couldn't be more wrong to compare the two. The story of Dave follows David Byrd, also known as the enigmatic joke rapper Lil Dicky, and his rise from obscurity to, well, less obscurity. The story of Atlanta is about Donald Glover's character Earn, a Princeton dropout trying to make ends meet by becoming his cousin's manager, who happens to be an up-and-coming rapper named Paperboy. So far we have two stories about people trying to come up through the world of rap, but the way that it's done and the conclusions that we come to is what distinguishes these two shows and sets them apart from one another. In terms of world building, one similarity that I will give between this show and Atlanta is that they do take the time to have episodes that focus on other characters and don't simply try to make the focus on just Dave or Earn. The worlds that they create are full, and it feels like each side character could have their own different spin-off show. However, the worlds they build could not be more different. The world of Dave is one that's very similar to that of our own. It is a world with very real characters who have very real problems, from Gator's bipolar disorder to Dave's own issues with his, well, Lil Dicky, if you get what I'm saying. This is a world that's built on relatability and also brutal realness. Dave's world is an honest world, and it doesn't apologize for that one bit. It's a world with a lot of heart, and it's a world with some endearingly awkward characters. Atlanta's world, however, borders somewhere between surreal and very gritty realism. It's a world where drive-through windows get robbed with AK-47s and the cashier pulls out an AK of their own. Justin Bieber is a black male, and a crowd of people get run over by an invisible car. But it's also a world where our main character, Earn, lives in a storage unit, rapper Paperboy lives in an apartment like normal people would, and characters visit the very real restaurant J.R. Cricket's to get lemon pepper wings wet. A culinary stamp of the Atlanta area. Atlanta uses surrealism to bring more attention to the issues at hand, often making a social commentary. Atlanta uses surrealism to bring some of the more important issues more attention, whereas Dave uses realism as a way to endear the audience to the characters. So before we dive further, I'm going to define some terms just in case I'm saying some things that people aren't understanding. Surrealism began as a 20th century movement in art and literature which sought to release the creative potential of the unconscious mind. For example, by the irrational juxtaposition of images. Essentially, they try to make things that are extremely over the top or at the far extremes of things, or even borderline absurd, just to bring more attention to the actual thing at hand. A good example of a modern day movie that uses surrealism to a heavy extent would be Sorry to Bother You, also starring Lakeith Stanfield, who's in Atlanta, so that's pretty cool. Realism is the precise, detailed, and accurate representation in art of the visual appearance of scenes and objects. A good example of a movie that uses realism to its advantage is Schindler's List, or even Raging Bull. These movies focus on taking the most realistic approach towards both the story and what they depict. For example, in Atlanta, a young man decides to identify as a 34-year-old white man, which on the surface seems absurd, until you remember that Rachel Dolezal did the same thing in 2015, even going as far as to become an NAACP chapter president of Spokane, Washington. They subverted a real-life event into a comedic bit to show the absurdity of the whole event and to make a statement on transracial identities, however subtle it may be. And this fits the bill of Donald Glover's methodology. If you want to see another example, you don't have to go much further away from his work. You can look at the music video, This Is America, where he uses extremely graphic, violent imagery and very surreal imagery to bring home a very simple point. He's showing you everything he wants you to see in that video, but he's not showing it to you in a conventional way. He's very much going with the extremes, because often that's where the truth can be found. So if you see a scene out of Atlanta and the first thing you think is, that doesn't make sense, that could never happen, that's the point. They want you to pay more attention to what's happening, what happened before it, and what's going to take place after that. These surreal moments are random and they're jarring. And that's the exact purpose of them. To get you to say, I wonder what they're trying to get across. And then they show you. Dave, on the other hand, has an episode that follows Gata, Lil Dicky's real life hype man, which is something I didn't know before I started recording this. It's pretty dope. And his struggles with bipolar disorder. This was one of the most emotionally charged episodes of the series and had the potential to make a grand statement about mental health. But the end product of this episode isn't so much a mental health awareness episode, but it's just something to endear you more towards the characters. They never take that extra step, and that's fine, because you become more attached to the characters and the relationships between those characters, and you get to see that these people are really friends.
I think it's pretty cool that we've got the first hype man that's clinically depressed.
You can't fake this kind of chemistry. And the best part is, they didn't have to do anything absurd to get this point across to show you what they wanted to show you. They just showed you some very realistic moments from a very real man's life with real life problems. And once again, Dave uses brutal honesty to bring the audience in more. Dave is a show brimming with heart and enthusiasm, almost to the point where the only way the show could have some drama to it was to make Lil Dicky a villain within his own show. His own talent and narcissism almost drive away everyone who's close to him, and it's the reason why his relationship ends. This is a show that's driven by its relationships between the main characters. And thematically, this is a show that's just about the progression of relationships and how circumstances can change those relationships. Atlanta is more of a show that's just dripping with cynicism, and the only antagonist in it is life itself. This show is more driven by the events themselves and how they affect the characters on a financial, a mental, and a social level. Atlanta, more than anything else, is a satire. Now, you might wonder, what is it a satire of? Watchmen is a satire of the superhero genre. Tropic Thunder is a satire of the film industry. What is Atlanta satirizing? And the answer to that is simple. Whatever it chooses to satire in that week. From transracial identity, to the prison system, to what if Justin Bieber was black and did the stupid shit he used to do. Atlanta is a satire of life and the randomness of it. It's a show that doesn't pay attention to the coincidences or making things make sense. Because life itself is full of coincidences, and sometimes shit just doesn't make sense. It's simple. And that's the difference between these two shows. Dave is a celebration of life, and more so a window into the life of Lil Dicky. Whereas Atlanta is a satire of life, and not so much living life, but how the things that we take in and the stuff that we do, how it affects life. Dave uses life to endear us to the characters and their relationships. Atlanta uses life to show us how it can affect our own psyches and how we move forward. But all of this was just a really long-winded way to say that I love both of these shows, and I hope we get to see more of them in the not-so-distant future. They're two very different shows with very distinct sets of humor, and that's okay, because they set out with two very different goals. The comparison between the two of these shows isn't gonna stop just because I made this video, and maybe the 30 people are gonna watch it. It's not gonna change that at all. But what I do hope is that this can shed some light on how different these shows are, and people can stop just calling these shows the white or black version of the other. They're both very different shows, and just let them be distinct. Enjoy them for what they are. So, as always, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to watch this. I hope that you learned something and you came away from this with something. And I also hope that I can keep doing more stuff like this. I actually had a ton of fun doing research trying to figure some of this stuff out. So, as always, have a great weekend. And, go out and be great. Stay safe. We're almost through this. Maybe. I don't know. But take the necessary steps to make sure you're protected. Why did that sound like a sex thing? Why couldn't you just say safe again? Peace.